Hey everybody, welcome to Gosher Prepping. Thanks for joining us. When it comes to a nuclear attack on American soil, of course, as preppers, that's one of the things we want to look at and see if we can survive. And for some reason, in people's minds, they think that the Russians or Chinese want to completely just annihilate every single city in the United States. I'm not discounting that. But you have to understand there's a lot more to it than that. And there's specific areas strategically that are targeted by the Russians and Chinese in case there is some kind of nuclear exchange. Stick with the video. I hope it's going to be enlightening for you and help you prepare for, well, hopefully that never happens. And the first term you need to understand is what's called the nuclear sponge. In America, we have what's called a nuclear sponge. We purposely put our missiles in areas that are not very populated, so that way they will soak up a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union, drawing fire away from populated cities like, for example, New York, Chicago, Seattle, etc. And even though this is a very old term and a very old strategy, it still is in effect, by the way. Basically place all the missiles toward the center of the country, not a lot of population. And by the way, if Russia launches missiles, they're going to come over the North Pole and they will come into that nuclear sponge area, hopefully in an area that's going to be targeted heavily, and in the cities, not so much targeted. Let me show you. Here we go in the United States. You'll see the central portion here, which is a very sparsely populated area. 7 states in total. Montana, part of Wyoming, part of Colorado, part of Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Missouri. Now, in this specific diagram, it says if it's black, it's been outdated. And that may be true when it comes to ICBMs as far as our silos, but doesn't mean these are completely out of the picture. For example, Whiteman Air Force Base is still absolutely active, home of our B-2 bombers, and more specifically, very, very nuclear capable. And understand the Russians alone have so many missiles, they could easily attack our nuclear sponge, and they have plenty left over for many other strategic targets, which I'll show you in just a minute. But even if they just attack the nuclear sponge, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have some type of, well, obviously fallout if that happens. And this map from the United States is from FEMA. It shows of course, here's the nuclear sponge, here's Whiteman Air Force Base, and it shows fallout patterns. Fallout typically does not go this far. 200 or 300 miles, typically max for fallout. Although you can have radioactive particles still traveling further within 200 or 300 miles. That's the real dangerous areas. So in their picture, we're not going to see a whole lot of dangerous coming all the way up into New York from Whiteman Air Force Base. It is conceivable, I guess, and you'll see some other targets down here too. But either way, obviously, even if you're in the yellow zone, there is a possibility, I would even say a probability, you will have some radioactive material coming your way. But again, just because you don't live in Montana or North Dakota, well, it doesn't mean you possibly may not be affected by this. And I always tell everybody, look to see where your house is at. See if there are any targets near you and see if there are upwind. Generally speaking, prevailing winds go from west to east across the United States, not always. And therefore, if there is a nuclear attack to the west of you, there's an excellent chance that fallout is heading your way. Because it's not certainly the nuclear sponge that we're looking at. These are nuclear facilities in which we can, like, for example, enrich uranium. Look, they're everywhere. And I have to note, which ironically speaking, a lot of uranium that we get that's processed, we import it from Russia. Go figure. So you can see it's far more than just the nuclear sponge. There's lots of areas that may be a target, but even more so, look at this. This is an interactive map of all the military bases across the country. I'll put a link for this below, by the way. So, let's say that you live in Colorado. Let's go ahead and zoom into Colorado. All these black spots are military bases. Some are actually more important than others. For example, right here, we have Peterson Air Force Base, the Air Force Academy. Oh, and one of my favorite bases I was stationed at for a while, Fort Carson. What a fantastic base. It's huge. It goes way down here too, by the way. But this is the main area for all the buildings and such. So obviously this part of Colorado is not nuclear. Up here it is. But nevertheless, though, guaranteed that these bases are going to be a target of at least one independent warhead. At least one. And from that, we see a lot of fallout that could go onto Kansas because of that. Now zoom out and find your neck of the woods. Now, I'll link this below. You're welcome to go ahead and check this out and see where you're at. For example, we zoom in here to Whiteman Air Force Base. And again, this is a huge target, by the way. Prevailing winds go. St. Louis, not going to be a happy day if that happens. But this is just a couple examples out of hundreds of locations across the country, hundreds. And the Russians have thousands of missiles, thousands. In fact, when it comes to tactical nuclear warheads, they have 10 times the amount of tactical nuclear warheads than we do in the United States. But there is just one more website I want to look at, mapping every power plant in the United States. Because they have so many missiles, understand they're going to go after our nuclear sponge first, military bases second, nuclear processing facilities, etc. But even if they don't target population centers, they are going to target our infrastructure. When it comes to power plants, certainly could be on their map of as far as attack goes, because they know if they crash the grid, well, we're going to be killing each other if that happens. We talk about that all the time on the channel. So let's look at this website. So first off, this general map, and again, I'll put a link for this one too. Plant capacity by megawatt. Obviously, we have far more on the East Coast than the West Coast. Even in this nuclear sponge area, you don't see a whole lot. But I certainly want to look at this specific map, nuclear power map, because what a great place for a target. Not only can we hit it nuclear to take out some of our power, but spreads even more dirty contaminants as far as basically sending it to Chernobyl in the United States. And then one final note, I want you to understand that even though, I will tell you right now, there are cities on the crosshairs when it comes to, for example, Russian nuclear weapons. It doesn't have to be Russia, it could be China, North Korea, etc. They will target civilian centers, but that is not their priority. Will it happen? Won't it happen? It's hard to say. When you look at New York City, it's not simply just New York City and they want to kill civilians. It's not about that to try to just kill people. It is to basically cripple the United States. Another way they can do that is understand some of our major financial centers are located in New York City. Same thing with Chicago and Washington, D.C. Obviously, they're not trying to target civilians in Washington, D.C., but our entire government structure in Washington, D.C. guaranteed will be a target. So you have to understand this whole concept as far as nuclear goes. It is a military technique. It's not simply just trying to annihilate the enemy totally. Who knows what might happen? I don't think that will, though. All right, so for you, what you can do, obviously, is find out what type of bases are near you, what type of bases are upwind of you. Are you near some of those infrastructure locations, a nuclear power plant? Are you located close to some kind of political building or political target that might be hit from nuclear missiles? And then, since the dynamics of how all this works is so vastly changing, where the missiles will actually hit, Russian nukes overall really aren't the most accurate of things. They can steer them, but in America, we always try to stress for strategic strikes. In Russia, they more are about just like overall pounding the area. So who knows what might be hit? Instead of trying to predict, I have people email all the time, do you think I'm going to get hit here? Yeah, you very well might, because who knows what might happen in that situation. But two things about that I want you to talk about. Number one is, instead of trying to predict if you're going to be hit, etc., you really need to get a Geiger counter. I'll link below the one I talk about all the time on the channel. It's a fantastic unit, inexpensive, easy to use, and it's something I wouldn't be caught without, because if there's fallout outside, if there isn't fallout, this will tell you if things are radioactive. You don't want to ingest anything radioactive. But the second thing I want to address is understand all of the original estimates that came out in the 70s, 80s, and made it worse with movies like The Day After, etc. Talk about this thing called nuclear winter. And originally, it was all developed and, practically speaking, invented by scientists who tried to skew it to make it look like we need to stop nuclear weapons. And I'm with you. I hate it. It's absolutely horrible we have to live like this. But they made it so it looked like if there's a nuclear winter or a nuclear, exchange, it's going to cause a nuclear winter. And the majority of scientists today said that's not simply going to be the case. Are you going to have millions of people die? Probably even a few billion, but it's not going to annihilate life on the planet. So that's good. So again, as preppers, that's where we come in. We want to make sure that we're on the basically group who does survive this horrible, nasty nuclear exchange that may take place. I don't want to think about it. From my role as a nuclear specialist in the military, for years, I had nightmares about some of the stuff I saw and the possibilities of this happening. It is a very real possibility, obviously. High probability, it seems to be getting closer to a high probability every single day as we see more and more countries basically setting on one side of a line or another in what seems to be forming World War III. And I hope and pray it doesn't lead to a nuclear exchange. But you know what? The way things are going, I certainly can't rule that out. And hopefully you and your family are prepared for this by trying to have everything set. I have a whole nuclear series on this too, by the way, which talks about all the different effects of a nuclear weapon attack. I'm going to link that first video. If you haven't had a chance to watch them, do so. Even if you have watched them, go through them again and take notes. Because again, every single day it seems to be getting closer and closer to having some kind of major, horrible nuclear exchange. And again, something we don't think about, but as preppers, we have to. Thanks for watching.